Poor posture alone doesn't destroy your spine, but what you do in the first 30 seconds after sitting down just might. There is one specific postural habit that most adults over 50 perform without a second thought, dozens of times every single day, at a desk, in a car, on a sofa, at a kitchen table. And new imaging research now shows it is compressing spinal discs at a rate that accelerates irreversible degeneration by up to 40% faster than in people who don't do it. Not heavy lifting, not an old injury, something you are. Not slouching, not crossing your legs, not even looking down at your phone. Though that doesn't help, something far more subtle. A 30-second window that most people don't even register as a position. And the most dangerous part, your doctor has probably never mentioned it, because it doesn't show up as pain until the damage is already significant on imaging. Stay with me until the end, because the single corrective habit I will show you today is so simple, so completely free, that a peer-reviewed study published in the European Spine Journal found it measurably reduced intradiscal pressure and slowed disc height loss in adults over 50 after just 8 weeks of consistent application. And yet almost no one does it. I have spent over 2 decades reading spinal MRIs, and I have spent just as long watching the same preventable pattern show up on scan after scan in patients who had no idea it was happening until it was already too late to fully reverse. My name is Dr. Ivy Ellington, and I have spent decades as a musculoskeletal radiologist. Every single day I read spinal MRIs. I see what is happening inside the discs, the vertebrae, the facet joints, and the surrounding tissue of hundreds of patients. Patients of all ages, all fitness levels, all backgrounds. And what the imaging shows me, consistently, is not what most people expect. The patients with the worst scans are not always the ones who did the most physical labor. They are not always the oldest. They are not always the ones with the most obvious risk factors. The patients with the most accelerated disc degeneration are overwhelmingly the ones who sit, and who sit in one specific way that loads the lumbar spine in a manner it was never designed to sustain, repeatedly for years, without ever knowing they were doing it. Today, I am going to show you exactly what that looks like on imaging, and exactly what to do about it. Before I show you the problem, you need to understand what a healthy spinal disc is actually doing. Because without this, what I'm about to explain won't make complete sense. Your spinal discs are not passive cushions. They are living, dynamic structures. Each disc is composed of 2 primary parts, an outer ring of tough fibrous cartilage called the annulus fibrosus, and an inner gel-like core called the nucleus pulposus. In a healthy disc, that inner core is under constant controlled pressure, like a water balloon suspended between 2 vertebrae. That pressure is what gives the disc its height, its shock-absorbing capacity, and its ability to distribute load evenly across the vertebral end plates. When the system works correctly, it is extraordinary engineering. But here is what most people don't realize. That inner core is not static. Responds in real time to how you position your spine. Certain positions centralize the pressure evenly. Others drive it asymmetrically toward one side of the disc, toward the back wall of the annulus. With every passing minute you hold that position. Here is where it gets critical. Research using intradiscal pressure measurements, needles placed directly inside living discs to measure pressure in real time, has shown something that fundamentally changed the way spinal specialists think about posture. Lying flat, intradiscal pressure is at its lowest. Standing, pressure increases moderately. Walking, pressure is slightly higher but well tolerated. Sitting upright with good lumbar support, pressure is manageable. But sitting in a flexed, forward-loaded position, the position most people default to within the first 30 seconds of settling into a chair, drives intradiscal pressure to levels significantly higher than standing, higher than walking. And when that position is held for minutes, then hours, then years, the cumulative mechanical damage to the posterior annulus, the back wall of the disc, is measurable, progressive, and on imaging, unmistakable. This is not a worst-case scenario. This is the mechanism. This is what I see every day on the light box. When you were in your 30s, your discs were resilient enough to absorb that repeated mechanical stress without significant consequence. The nucleus had high water content, close to 90% water in a young, healthy disc. The annular fibers were dense and elastic. The disc could deform under load and rebound. But after the age of 50, that picture changes in ways that the imaging makes impossible to deny. Water content in the nucleus begins to decline. The annular fibers develop microtears that accumulate over time. The disc loses height, measurably, millimeter by millimeter, in some cases year by year, and the capacity to recover from repeated asymmetric pressure loading drops sharply. The habits your spine tolerated in your 30s are no longer tolerated in your 50s. The biology of the disc at 55 is fundamentally different from the biology of the disc at 35. And the most dangerous thing is that you feel nothing until the damage on imaging is already significant. This is why a major population study tracking adults across multiple age groups found that over 80% of adults over 50 show radiological evidence of significant disc degeneration. Whether they have symptoms or not, most of them have no idea. And a landmark analysis published in The Lancet identified low back pain, driven overwhelmingly by disc degeneration, as the single leading cause of disability worldwide. Not heart disease, not cancer, not stroke. Back pain. The #1 cause of lost function on the planet. Think about what that means, and think about what it means that the primary mechanical driver of that degeneration is something most people are doing right now in the chair they are sitting in, without a single warning from anyone who has ever reviewed their health. Or research published in Spine, one of the most rigorously peer-reviewed journals in musculoskeletal medicine, found that individuals who maintained habitual flexed lumbar posture during prolonged sitting showed significantly accelerated posterior disc degeneration compared to those who maintained neutral lumbar curvature. The difference in degeneration rate was not marginal. On MRI imaging, the structural difference between a spine that has spent years in habitual flexed sitting and one that has not is visible, measurable. And in many cases, by the time it produces symptoms, it has already been progressing silently for a decade. I want to tell you about a patient I will call Margaret. Margaret was 58 years old. She was a graphic designer, intelligent, health conscious, the kind of person who ate well, walked every morning, or had her annual checkups without fail and had never had a serious injury in her life. She came to me because her GP had referred her for an MRI after she reported 6 months of intermittent lower back pain. Nothing severe, just a persistent ache that she'd been dismissing as muscle tension. When I put her scan on the light box, what I saw did not match her profile at all. Multi-level disc degeneration at L3 to L4, L4 to L5, and L5 to S1. Posterior disc bulging at 2 levels. Annular fissuring that indicated years, not months, of accumulated mechanical stress. She was 58, fit, and her spine looked like it belonged to someone 15 years older. There was no trauma in her history, no heavy lifting, no identifiable injury. We'll come back to Margaret. Because what she told me in the consultation room, the detail that explained everything on that scan, is the reason I am making this video today. Here is the habit. The one specific thing that most people over 50 do every time they sit down, that silently and progressively loads the posterior wall of their spinal discs beyond what the annular tissue is designed to sustain. They allow their lower back to flex forward and lose its natural inward curve within the first 30 seconds of sitting. That is it. The lumbar spine rounds. The pelvis tilts backward. The natural lordosis, the gentle inward curve of the lower back, collapses. And the nucleus pulposus, the pressurized gel core of the disc, is driven posteriorly, toward the back wall, toward the nerves, over and over and over again, every time they sit, for years. It feels like nothing. It looks like nothing from the outside, and on imaging, it is everything. Here is the science. When the lumbar spine is in neutral lordosis, its natural curved position, the nucleus pulposus sits centrally within the disc. Pressure is distributed evenly across the vertebral end plates. The annular fibers are loaded symmetrically and are doing exactly the job they were designed for. But the moment the lumbar spine flexes, the moment that inward curve collapses into a forward rounding, the geometry of the disc changes. The vertebrae above and below tilt toward each other at the front and gap apart at the back. This drives the nucleus posteriorly, directly toward the weakest and most neurologically sensitive region of the annulus. Researchers and spinal clinicians call this posterior nuclear migration. It is the mechanism behind disc bulging, annular fissuring, and ultimately, disc herniation. And the critical point, the point that most people are never told, is that it is not a dramatic event. It is not caused by one heavy lift or one bad movement. It is caused by repeated, sustained posterior nuclear migration during prolonged flex sitting, accumulated over years. There is a second layer to this that surprises almost every patient I explain it to. Your discs are at their most vulnerable in the morning, for the first 30 to 60 minutes after you wake up. During sleep, when you are lying flat and disc pressure is at its lowest, your discs rehydrate. The nucleus absorbs fluid from the surrounding tissue through the imbibition process, expanding slightly and increasing in height. This is why you are measurably taller in the morning than in the evening, by as much as 1 to 2 centimeters. But that rehydrated, slightly expanded disc is also under higher internal tension. The annular fibers are stretched closer to their elastic limit. Research published in Clinical Biomechanics found that the risk of annular injury from flexed loading is significantly elevated in the first hour after waking, which means that the 30 seconds after you sit down at your desk, first thing in the morning, if you immediately collapse into a flexed lumbar position, is the single highest risk window of your entire day for disc tissue damage. And it is the moment most people pay the least attention to their posture. So what is the fix? What is the 30-second postural correction that the imaging evidence shows makes a measurable difference? It is this. Every time you sit down, every single time, before you do anything else, before you open a laptop, before you pick up your phone, before you begin whatever task brought you to that chair, you perform one deliberate spinal reset. Sit toward the front third of your seat. Roll your pelvis forward slightly. Not an exaggerated arch, just a gentle restoration of the natural inward curve at your lower back. Feel the weight shift from the back of your sitting bones toward a more central position. Now take one slow, deliberate breath in, and as you exhale, gently engage your lower abdominal muscles. Not a crunch, a gentle drawing in. Hold that position for 30 seconds before you settle into your task. That is your postural anchor. That is the position your disc needs to be in. And that 30 seconds of intentional setup at the beginning of every sitting period is what separates a spine that ages at its natural rate from one that ages at twice that rate. The second component is lumbar support, but not in the way most people use it. Research published in Applied Ergonomics found that passive lumbar support, simply placing a rolled towel or small cushion at the curve of the lower back, maintains neutral lumbar lordosis during prolonged sitting without requiring constant active muscular effort. This is critical, because the reason most people lose their lumbar curve within 30 seconds of sitting is not laziness, it is muscular fatigue. The deep spinal stabilizers, the multifidus and the lumbar erector spinae, cannot maintain an active neutral spine position indefinitely during prolonged static sitting, and they fatigue. And when they fatigue, the spine collapses into flexion. A passive support prevents that collapse. It requires nothing from the muscles. It maintains the geometry of the disc mechanically, continuously, for as long as it is in place. A rolled hand towel placed at the curve of your lower back in every chair you regularly use costs nothing. And on imaging, the difference it makes over years is not subtle. The third component is what spinal researchers call positional variation, and it is the most underrated element of disc health in long-duration sitting. No posture, however anatomically correct, is safe for indefinite periods. The disc depends on movement to circulate nutrients and expel metabolic waste through the imbibition process. Research from the Journal of Orthopedic and Sports Physical Therapy established that intradiscal nutrition becomes measurably compromised after approximately 30 minutes of static loading in any position. The clinical recommendation is unambiguous. Every 25 to 30 minutes of sitting must be interrupted by a minimum of 2 minutes of standing or gentle movement. Not a gym session, not a walk around the block. Simply standing, shifting your weight, taking 10 steps, performing 5 gentle lumbar extensions, standing upright, hands on your lower back, gentle backward bend. That 2-minute interruption repressurizes the imbibition mechanism, restores disc nutrition, and resets the mechanical environment inside the disc. Set a timer on your phone right now, 25 minutes. Every time it goes off, stand up for 2 minutes. That single habit, According to imaging follow-up data, is one of the most protective things you can do for your discs after the age of 50. If you are currently taking any long-term anti-inflammatory medication, NSAIDs like ibuprofen or naproxen, for chronic back pain, there is one additional thing I need you to know. These medications are effective at suppressing pain signals, and that is precisely the problem. Pain is your disc's primary warning system. When you suppress it pharmacologically, you remove the feedback mechanism that tells you when a posture or movement is loading your disc inappropriately. Patients on long-term anti-inflammatory medication for back pain consistently show faster rates of disc degeneration on serial MRI, not because the medication causes the degeneration, but because the absence of pain removes the behavioral signal that would otherwise prompt a postural correction. If you are managing chronic back pain with anti-inflammatories, I would strongly encourage you to ask your physician about a structured postural rehabilitation program, not as a replacement for medical management, but as a parallel intervention that addresses the mechanical cause rather than only the symptomatic effect. I promised I would come back to Margaret. In the consultation room, after I had walked her through her imaging, I asked her one question. I asked her to describe her typical workday. She told me she worked at a computer for 7 to 8 hours a day. She had done so for over 20 years. She worked on a laptop, which meant her screen was below eye level and her neck and lumbar spine were in habitual flexion for most of her working day. She took a lunch break but otherwise sat continuously. She had never thought about her sitting posture. Nobody had ever asked. Her GP had reviewed her diet, her exercise, her stress levels, her sleep. Nobody had ever asked about the 30 seconds. We made 3 changes before she left. A lumbar roll for her desk chair, a standing desk riser for her laptop, and a 25-minute timer on her phone. 8 months later, she came back for a follow-up consultation. Her pain had resolved almost entirely within the first 6 weeks. Her physiotherapist had noted significant improvement in her lumbar mobility, and she told me something that has stayed with me. And she said, "I've been sitting at a desk for 20 years and nobody ever told me I was doing it wrong." I didn't have a satisfying answer for why that was the case, but I told her what I'll tell you now. The imaging evidence exists, the mechanical understanding exists, and the correction itself costs nothing and takes 30 seconds. It simply needs to reach the people who need it before the damage on their next scan is beyond what lifestyle intervention can address. So let me bring this together, because I want you to leave this video not just informed, but with a precise, actionable picture of what you can do starting today. After the age of 50, your discs are losing water content. Your annular fibers are accumulating micro tears, and your body's capacity to recover from repeated mechanical stress is declining. The habitual flexed lumbar sitting, the default position most people adopt within 30 seconds of sitting down, drives the nucleus pulposus posteriorly toward the most vulnerable region of the disc, repeatedly, silently, without pain, for years. The imaging evidence for this mechanism is unambiguous, but you have 3 evidence-based tools that directly address it at the structural level. First, the 30-second postural reset every time you sit. Pelvis forward, lumbar curve restored, gentle abdominal engagement. Second, a passive lumbar support in every chair you regularly use, maintaining the disc geometry mechanically when muscular support fatigues. Third, a 25-minute movement timer, interrupting static disc loading with 2 minutes of standing, or gentle extension every half hour. None of this requires a prescription. None of this requires equipment, appointments, or expense. It requires understanding what is actually happening inside your discs and giving your spine the mechanical environment it needs to age at its natural rate rather than at twice that rate. Here is what I am asking you to do right now. Get something. A rolled up hand towel, a small cushion, anything with some firmness to it, and place it at the curve of your lower back in the chair you are sitting in as you watch this. Just that one thing. Feel the difference in your lumbar position. That is your disc in a safer mechanical environment. That is what the imaging shows matters. Which part of this surprised you most? The morning vulnerability, the 30-second window, or the imaging evidence? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And the pattern I see in those answers tells me exactly what information is not reaching the people who need it most. There is someone in your life who sits at a desk or in a car or on a sofa for hours every day, doing exactly what Margaret did, and has no idea that the scan they will eventually need is already being written by the 30 seconds after they sit down. You may not know who that person is yet, but this video might be the thing that reaches them before the damage on their imaging is beyond what a towel roll and a timer can address. Share it. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do. Every week I bring you imaging-based, evidence-grounded information about what your spine and musculoskeletal system actually need after 50. The information I wish every patient had before they ever ended up in front of me with a scan that told a story nobody warned them was being written. Take care of your spine. It has been holding you upright every minute of every day without asking for anything in return. Give it 30 good seconds every time you sit down. It is more than a fair trade.